Well, if you've noticed the title of today's sermon, it might raise a few questions in your mind already. And the most important of those being, is it ever okay to break a rule? In light of that, let me begin with this one caveat. I am in no way suggesting that rules don't matter or that we should arbitrarily break them. Speaking for myself, there are some rules that I just do not break, and that I will not break, and that I will never break, regardless of who or what tries to get me to break them. I have my own personal list of non-negotiables, and so do each of you. We all have them. We know why rules exist. They exist for a reason, because they prevent catastrophe. You and I follow our non-negotiable rules because if we didn't, that would be the equivalent of jumping off a cliff. But what I'm asking this morning is there ever a time when other rules may be broken, or at least bent just a little bit? Is there ever a time when we may choose between being correct and being compassionate, or when we may choose between being right and being righteous? Recently, someone shared with me the story about another person who had gone to a hospital emergency room and was waiting to see the ER doctor, when a woman came in holding a little girl, probably about 3 or 4 years old, and the woman was holding a bloody handkerchief over the little girl's mouth, and the little girl was crying, and the woman said, "Please, my little girl's been hurt, I need to see," and she was cut off in mid-sentence. And the woman behind the desk said to her, "Ma'am, you need to take a seat, and then one of the clerks will sign you in." And she says, "But my little girl has been hit in the mouth with again, cut off in mid-sentence," and said, "Ma'am, please take a seat, and someone will be with you shortly." It was right at that moment that one of the ER physicians walked in and said to the woman behind the desk, said, "Shame on you, this little girl needs help right now." And with that, he ushered the woman and her little girl back into an examination room. And the person, the third party who was observing all this, says this was clearly a time when pain prevailed over protocol. And he said that the physician saw the little girl's pain, but the clerk saw only the hospital's procedure. I don't have the news articles in front of me, but those of you on social media, I bet you've seen this. There have been at least a couple of cases in the last couple of years in our country where people have taken it upon themselves to cook food for homeless people and to serve it to them on the streets, only to have their local municipal government step in and intervene and stop them from doing that. Why? Because they didn't have the proper license. I remember one in particular that really stood out. There was a retired couple, a husband and a wife, and they cooked up a bunch of hot food for the homeless in their city, and they were serving it on the streets. But the local city government, because that couple did not have proper licensing, told them to stop doing that. And for good measure, they sent the police in to pour liquid bleach into the food to keep them from serving the rest of it. Now, this has happened twice in this country to the best of my knowledge. And it was a case of making sure that the rules were strictly followed to the letter of the law, even if it meant that bending those rules just a little bit, other people could have benefited from it. When is it more important to be compassionate than it is to be correct? I'm not going to answer that question for you. That's not my place to do that. I'm simply asking that we each one stretch the muscles of our moral compass a little bit and to think seriously about matters of doing right from wrong. In today's gospel story from Luke chapter 13, Jesus heals a woman who had been crippled for 18 years. And predictably, it was a religious leader who got all bent out of shape over that because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. We'll look at it up here. This is not an exact scripture quotation, by the way. It's a paraphrase. The synagogue leader says, "You shouldn't heal on the Sabbath, only on the week before." Now, anyone who is even remotely familiar with traditional Judaism or Christianity knows that it goes against custom to work on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of rest. It's what it's been set aside for. It's also the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Fourth commandment, or possibly third, depending upon whose catechism that you're reading from. But Jesus is pretty quick with a comeback. Jesus says, "Oh, please, just stop. Just stop, will you?" He says, "You water your animals on the Sabbath, don't you? You better. Well, I'm going to heal them too." In other words, there is a threshold. There is a threshold of common sense and fundamental decency. Should you start a business on the Sabbath or enter into a brand new work project? Not if you're one of God's people. I mean, that is a day of rest. But let's say that your child or your grandchild develops a nasty fever and you don't have any medicine at home. Does that mean that you shouldn't run out to Walgreens to get a medicine? Of course not. I'm pretty sure the Palatine and Rolling Meadows and other fire departments respond to 911 calls on the Sabbath as well. But today's text in Luke 13, this is not really about the Sabbath, when we should keep it and when we shouldn't keep it. What it is, rather, is about being able to differentiate. It's about being able to see when a person is more important than the rules. It's about moving beyond seeing things in just black and white and understanding that we live in a very gray world. I know of a man, true story, several years ago, a young couple in their 30s, and the wife was in the intensive care unit of a hospital dying of a rare disease. And the man had gone to be with his wife in her last few moments. And unlike many people, she was fully conscious. And she was able to experience the last few moments of her life fully awake and fully aware. And this young couple in their 30s, the husband and wife, with the wife lying in the ICU bed, as they said their goodbyes to each other, the wife asked her husband for a drink of water. Her throat was hot and dry and parched, and she prayed for just at least some momentary relief. Upon hearing this, an ICU nurse who was standing nearby looked at the man and shook her head no, because this woman's condition had precluded her from taking fluids orally. But the man knew that his wife was going to be dead in a few minutes anyway, and he ignored that nurse's injunction, and he went over and he got a paper cup and he filled it with cool, fresh water, and then taking the woman's head gently in his arms, he held the cup up to her lips and helped her drink it, giving her some relief. It was a moment of relief for her. And it was not more than just a few minutes later, just as the doctor had predicted, that this young woman would close her eyes and breathe her last. It was going to happen anyway, but the man made a decision to go against the hospital's rules in order to bring a sense of momentary relief to his young wife. Now, this was in 1972, and I think some things have probably changed since then. But I know the story well because that man and that woman were my father and my mother. Sometimes people are more important than the doggone rules. If there's anything that we can glean from this story about Jesus healing on the Sabbath, it's that. And so as you go from this sanctuary today, keep the Sabbath as far as you can. And I'll tell you, my wife keeps it better than I do. Keep some rules. We have to keep some rules because things can fall apart if you don't. But above all, keep kindness, because kindness trumps over pretty much everything else. Amen.